So Captain Marvel is the latest addition to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Saw a brief mention of her at the end of Avengers: Infinity War. So now we're kind of asking, like, well, where was she during this whole time? What happened with Captain Marvel? So obviously we've got to go back into the past to figure out, where did Captain Marvel come into existence, and when did she associate with Nick Fury? So a lot of questions are up on the table here. So we start off with Brie Larson playing Carol Danvers, who we first see her as a member of the Star Force of the Kree Empire. Now you might remember the Kree from Guardians of the Galaxy. They addressed, they were kind of led by Ronan the Accuser. And here she's playing just kind of like this intergalactic warrior. She has these special powers where she can like shoot energy out of her hands, but she's got to control it because it's still like an enigma to the Kree. They don't quite know how she has these powers or anything about her memory, and they don't really have time to address it because they have a big war going on with the Skrulls, which are these kind of like green-faced aliens with pointy ears who can like cover up those pointy ears and that green skin by transforming into whoever they want. So they make perfect spies for infiltration. So then the battle eventually, after a while, the battle shifts to Earth and into 1995 Earth. Now, initially, this was my biggest fear about the film. I feared that, okay, they're going to, mid-90s Earth in America, so I feared that, oh no, they're going to go overboard with the references here. And it kind of starts off that way. It kind of starts off where, they they show, like, the Blockbuster Video and the True Lies stand and the Radio Shack. And I thought, oh man, we're going to get overloaded with all this. There's going to be nothing but 90s jokes here. But no, actually, I was surprised how well they kind of used the setting here. How well they use it to their advantage. Don't make kind of the obvious jokes. Don't get me wrong. They make a few 90s jokes here and there. But they do firmly kind of like establish this world and just kind of like go with it. They don't kind of like, make the obvious 90s jokes all over the place here. They also don't go too over the top with the younger Samuel L. Jackson playing a younger Nick Fury. This time with much less wrinkles and still has his eye before he got that eye patch there that you see in the other Avengers films. And thankfully, yeah, they don't go over the board with this younger Samuel L. Jackson either. Cause initially I was thinking like, okay, like during the mid-90s, what was Samuel L. Jackson doing? He was doing Pulp Fiction. He was doing Die Hard with a Vengeance. He was being very loud and bold and all over the place. And I fully expected him on this sci-fi adventure to just be screaming and going nuts, going all over the place, because I figured, oh, they got a younger Samuel Jackson. But no, he's actually understated here too, because like I said, he's still Nick Fury. We still gotta keep that calm and cool Nick Fury going, even though he's a little ridiculous in a few scenes. Like, you throw a cat his way and he goes nuts for cats. So they have fun with that between there. There are a few more familiar faces that turn up here. Mostly kind of like side characters we haven't seen in quite a few Marvel films, so those are kind of neat to see. Now, I will say that the other thing, too, that I really liked about the film was how it's mostly kind of just like Carol trying to find her memories and trying to assemble herself, like trying to remember like what happened to her, who she's supposed to be, amid this kind of spy plot. Like, how like all these kind of Marvel films kind of all have like some sort of like subgenre that they're going into. Like Ant-Man is obviously a heist type of film. Black Panther's obviously kind of like, like a royalty, kind of like Shakespearean type deal. This is kind of more like a sci-fi spy thriller. Because you have like, Carol trying to solve this mystery, and while she's doing it, she's discovering, things she didn't know about characters, finding different alliances, trying to figure out where she wants to be placed in this intergalactic war. So I kind of like that. What I didn't like so much about it, which is kind of holding the film back, and a few people have mentioned this too, is that because we spend so much of the film trying to understand Carol and trying to like build her up as like the character for her first solo film, we really don't get to see her defined as much as the character. Like, she doesn't really come into her own as Captain Marvel, fully embracing her powers until the end there. There are, although I will admit, there are a few scenes in between there where she does kind of become a bit confident, kind of more of that confident Captain Marvel we want to see in the film. But like I said, she spent so much time trying to define herself that she really does. It really doesn't feel like they give Larson as much. It feels like she's more locked into this this thriller plot and doesn't get to have as much fun. And I think that's also too because of, you know, how grounded the film feels. Like I said, doesn't go overboard with the 90s stuff, doesn't go overboard with younger Samuel Jackson. And unfortunately, it doesn't go too overboard with Captain Marvel, even though you want to, because this is a character who has like all this energy coursing through her body and can pretty much obliterate armadas. So you'd like to see a little bit more of that going on there. But I will say though, I do like, you know, the message of this film, even though the message is hammered into you, especially in that third act, you know, about female empowerment, which is fine because I don't mind it so much here as opposed to other films I've seen it in, like, you know, like heck, you want to go down like the Disney line, you know, stuff like A Wrinkle in Time and Nutcracker in the Four Realms, where it was just like pounded into your skull and that's all the film had to offer. Here, there's a little bit more to offer. They make it very clear here what this film is about, obviously. But the other thing too that I liked about it was that there's a scene here where she essentially, where someone says like, you know, put down your weapon and fight fair, and basically she doesn't because she feels that I don't have to prove myself to you. You know, I've been working to prove myself. And I kind of like that aspect of the film in the sense that, you know, that Captain Marvel really doesn't have to be like a huge example of kind of like female empowerment, even though the film is really trying hard to push that aspect of the film. In that regard, I think the film stumbles a little bit, but for mostly locking Brie Larson in kind of like this prison of the plot where she has to define herself and kind of unravel this sci-fi conspiracy going on between the Kree and the Skrulls, it's actually pretty fun. I do like how they unload a lot of information on you in the very first act of the film. And it does become a little bit overwhelming in the first act, but I like how they kind of like slowly piece the puzzle together of Carol Danvers' past, as well as the conspiracy that's going on between the Kree and the Skrulls. I liked how it's kind of like slowly built up in there. And I know for some people it might make them a little bit impatient there, but don't worry, there is plenty of action still. I really did like the subway scene is actually pretty cool there, where Danvers is basically trying to hunt down Skrulls and trying to find out who might be a Skrull on the train there. And of course, at one point, yeah, she finds the old lady, and she has a fight with the old lady that is completely ridiculous. But I also love the fact that, you know, because she's an old lady, everyone thinks that Carol Danvers is just picking on this old lady, so they all try to stop her. I kind of like that. They have some fun there. And I also like, you know, Samuel Jackson has a lot of fun in this film too. You have I'm going on the cast. I'm trying not to make any like big reveals here. Jude Law's okay. He has some great bits here. He makes like a good like kind of like strict character you want to see. Annette Bening has kind of like a domineering role, which is kind of fun too. And beyond that, I feel like I shouldn't mention anyone else in the cast because then it'll just reveal a whole bunch of spoilers. But it was fun to see a lot of these characters again, kind of slipping back into like these comfy roles that they've been in before, just in like a much different era. And I like that. I like that. It almost seems like the film is kind of understated in its structure, and at the same time kind of very blunt with its message too, which kind of creates this kind of like conflicting nature. But that being said, I did like how the film built up. Where a lot of films, I feel, within like the Marvel solo structure of you know, like building a character up as, you know, they're all cocky and then they get kicked down a hole and they lose all their powers and they got to build themselves back up again. I like how there's a little bit of a variation here with that, in the sense that I was more intrigued with where the film was going into the third act, as opposed to other Marvel films where, you know, you get to that third act of the solo film and you pretty much know how everything is going to go down. This is a little bit more interesting, and I think it's mostly because it exists between films here. Like, you know, it's long after the events of Captain America, the First Avenger, but before the events of, you know, like the Avengers Initiative and all that. And I love how it kind of like plays with the timeline and pieces little bits and pieces of the timeline together here. It doesn't reference like everything here. Like, if you're hoping, because it's so close to like the 80s, that there's some aspect of Ant-Man that comes into play, you might be a little bit down. But there are tiny little bits here and there that do relate back to other Marvel films, that do kind of connect, kind of like the bigger picture, especially of like the the intergalactic story you got going, and then like the whole deal with like Shield. I love how like all this kind of like connects here, and it's kind of cute to see. There's a lot of fun action here. They do make great use of the 1990s soundtrack here. You know, in the same way that, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy had that kind of like 70s aesthetic. Here you have very much the 90s aesthetic. That is used quite well. They make some pretty good choices in soundtrack here. And the action is just a lot of fun, especially when you get to the third act with a lot more sci-fi action, including one particular character who, this character's on the posters, but I don't want to mention it. It's just a very cute and unsuspecting character that you wouldn't suspect is a very violent alien. It's actually pretty fun. So yeah, the film, I think, it's very blunt with its message here. I think, yeah, it doesn't give Brie Larson as much room as I'd like to see her to expand with the character. It more or less feels like she's too busy, like, unraveling this plot to have as much fun here. Aside from like the few scenes she does have where she is kicking ass, where we do want to see that. And yeah, they tie it right back in with Avengers in Infinity War here. So if you're gearing up for Endgame, you might as well get in on this too. Especially if you've been keeping up with the Marvel timeline here, you'll be able to like pick out little things here with Guardians of the Galaxy. And I have to mention this too. This isn't a huge spoiler, but they have a big tribute to Stan Lee at the beginning of the film, and the cameo they have here is very well tied into the 1990s for what they give Stan Lee to do here. So that was very neat. So yeah, it's now, do I feel like, because there's been a lot of controversy over this film, do I feel like it's, you know, like the best, you know, like female representation in like the kind of like the same way that Black Panther was last year, with how it felt very culturally significant in terms of how it's presented? Honestly, I don't really feel like it has that same impact. I feel like it does get a little bit muddled for how much I love the non-sequential storytelling. I feel like a little bit of that character of Captain Marvel gets lost in this whole like tricky and little bit of muddy timeline here. I think it loses a little bit of that impact of that it wants to have with like a female representation, that when we get to the third act, they've got no choice. They got to like pound it in because there's not a lot of time left in the film. So I don't feel like it weaves it in as seamlessly. And like Disney films have kind of had this problem, you know, with stuff like A Wrinkle in Time and The Nutcracker and the Four Realms. But that's okay. I mean, some people are going to see this as like, you know, like a terrible example of female representation. But as Captain Marvel states in the film, you know, I don't have to prove anything to you. And that's an aspect I really do like about the film. Because like, in a sense, like, I don't think that, you know, we shouldn't have. I don't think that Brie Larson has to prove herself as, you know, as big as like Captain Marvel in terms of like, you know, whether the film is good or not. I like the film, but I completely understand why people wouldn't see you know, Brie Larson's character as being fully embraced, which really does hold the film back. I can see that. But for what it is, as a sci-fi spy thriller, I think it does a great job setting itself up. I love how it pieces together the story. The action's pretty fun. The special effects look great. Obviously, you know, that makeup on Samuel L. Jackson looks pretty damn good. So I had a decent amount of fun with the film. I think it works for what it is. Yeah, I can't say much more than I had fun without spoiling anything. I don't want to offer any spoilers for anyone who's going to see the film, but just know that I had fun. I don't think it's the strongest Marvel film, but I do think it's pretty fun for what it is. So for Captain Marvel, 3.5 out of 5 stars. So there you go.